So as you have your Bibles in Genesis 22 and Hebrews 11, over the last 2 weeks we've been in this series called How Long? And we admittedly over the last 2 weeks we've been looking at seasons of waiting that I've been familiar with. 2 weeks ago we just generally looked at what waiting looks like. And if you haven't heard those messages and you want to, you can search Middleton Grace on YouTube and you can listen or watch those services. And last week we talked about what it means to wait in silence when it feels like God is not responding to our prayers, when we're praying prayers of hope or joy, or we're asking God to move or answer a prayer, and it feels like God is not answering us. And how we wait in silence. And I'm familiar with those two, but I'm going to be honest with you today. I'm not really familiar with the topic that we're going to be studying today. And if you look at the message of the title on your sermon guide, if you've got one of those, the message of today's sermon is called Waiting in the Suffering. Now, I've had difficult times in life, admittedly. I get that. I understand that when life has been hard or difficult for me, but I personally have not experienced what I would call a personal tragedy in my life. Pastors like to joke that as you begin to teach on a series or a subject, God always lets you go through whatever you're teaching on just so you have some personal material to pull from. Like Pastor Keith always jokes when we get ready to do a series on marriage, he and Lori always have an argument that first week over something small and insignificant. And as I was laying out what this series was going to look like back in January, and I realized that God wanted me to preach on this topic of waiting and suffering, my prayer immediately began to be, Dear God, please protect my family. I don't want to experience personal tragedy, Lord. And while I haven't personally experienced it, I understand that there are people sitting here today that have gone through this. And this message may bring up for you raw emotion, and I understand that. And I don't want in any way for you to think that I'm dealing with this subject lightly or flippantly. But I do want to be honest to what the material has for us today as we look at the life of Abraham. And so loss and suffering are some of the most raw human emotions out there. Dealing with the unfairness of life often leaves us dazed and battered and confused and bruised. And these emotions can be triggered by really any number of situations. But for the high school kid, just breaking up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend can be immediate suffering. And then they can't see next week or next month, let alone in the next year. A high school kid only understands today. But for some of us, that suffering may have been the unexpected death of a loved one. And when I think about it, it comes up in my mind, especially a child. Or it's the betrayal of a close friend or a family member. Or maybe it's a change in your circumstances not caused by yourself. Someone outside of you sinned and caused your life to change. And you're experiencing a sense of loss and tragedy. Or it could be part of a larger national tragedy. And when I think about that, I think about 9/11 or for the Jewish people, the Holocaust. God seems to use suffering to teach his people things at times. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is hard to go through moments of suffering. And in the midst of it, we can look at God and we can go, what are you doing? Why are you doing this to me, God? I don't understand it. And it's okay to say those things to him. And on the outset of our message, I want to say this, just a point blank. I don't know how to say it any more clearly, that there may be times in your life where what you're going through is so difficult and so tough that you can't work through those emotions on your own, and you may need to go see a counselor. Listen to me. If that is you, or if you are seeing a counselor currently, you need to hear this. It does not mean you're broken or that you are less than. You go see a doctor for a broken leg. When tragedy strikes, you may need somebody to help you talk through it. There's nothing wrong with it. Like literally, David wrote an entire book of counseling sessions. It's called the Book of Psalms. He just cries out to God, and God answers, and it's back and forth of him just admittedly saying, God, I'm broken. I don't understand what you're doing. And then there's times of joy where he's going, God, I'm so blessed, my cup overflows. And you can be both of those things at the same time. You can be going through a tremendous sense of loss and suffering and tragedy, and at the same moment say, God, my cup runneth over, I'm so blessed. Those don't have to be independent of one another. And I think to be able to get to that place where you can be experiencing tragedy, where you can be understandably crying out to God, saying, God, why are you doing this? Or why is this happening to me right now? But at the same time, being able to say, God, I'm so blessed. My cup overflows. There's things that we have to learn, we have to apply to the situation. And praise God that He gave us the perfect example of following Abraham. As we get ready to read, I don't want to just skip over the messy parts of the life of Abraham. So if you've been here the last 2 weeks, you may go, okay, you went from 15 last week and you're jumping all the way to 21 and 22 this week. You skipped over some messy stuff. I'm just going to get it out of the way right now. So some background. Chapter 15, right? He starts to begin to take matters into his own hands. Chapter 16, he's still waiting for the heir, the long-promised child, and it hasn't happened yet. And his wife, Sarah at the time said, here, take my handmaid Hagar and sleep with her and have a child, and through my servant, I'll become a mom. And back in those days, that was legally binding. Like, she could give Hagar, the servant, to her husband, Abraham. Abraham would sleep with her, and Hagar gets pregnant. She has a child. And then the child is Abraham's firstborn son. So he does that. In chapter 20, Abraham lies about his wife being his wife. This is the second time that this has happened. He's scared when he goes into these foreign countries that the men are going to see his wife and be so overcome with lust towards his wife that he convinces her to lie to them and say, no, that's my brother, so they won't kill him. And so it happens again in chapter 20 that he takes her in to be part of his concubine, but God stops him from being able to consummate that relationship and comes to the king in a dream and says, you're cursed and I'm going to kill you because you take another man's wife. Abraham causes his wife to lie and he lies. And then we see in chapter 21 the long-awaited child arrives. And then Isaac is weaned, and Abraham begins to throw a huge party to celebrate his son coming of age. And we see Sarah gets mad because Hagar begins to laugh. And Sarah gets jealous. And I just want to read a few verses in 21. And starting in verse 10, she says this. So this is Sarah. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son. For the son of this slave woman shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. And the very thing was displeasing to Abraham on account of the son. But God said to Abraham, do not be displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. God reiterates the promise to Abraham that through Isaac your offspring will be named. And then we get to the next part of the story. We get to the part of the story that has application for you and I today. What does it look like to wait in suffering? When you're going through something that feels unbearable, or you know that God is asking you to do something that feels so far beyond your capability or possibility for you to do that you have no idea what step to take next. Hebrews 11 reports it this way. You don't have to flip to it because we're going to flip back and forth, but it says this in 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Verse 19, he considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Genesis 22 records it this way. It says, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, now mind you, that this was a test. No matter what you think about this story, know this from the beginning. Abraham in the previous chapter had just sent his firstborn son away. He drove off Hagar and Ishmael and drove them away. And he wasn't happy about it. Remember we read in 21, it says that he was displeased. And then here we get to 22, some years later. And it says, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here am I. He said, take your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains to which I shall show you. Anybody else read that and go, wait a second. You just said in the previous that Isaac was going to be my offspring, and then I go to Isaac. Can you imagine the conversation that goes on between Abraham and God? How do you have to give up something that you loved, that was good for you, bad for you, wasn't sinful for you, but you had to give something away, you had to let go of something, because God was saying, you don't need this in your life any longer. And I struggled giving up the second piece of cake after lunch. I can't imagine if God said to me, take your only son whom you love, Cooper, and take him to the mountain and sacrifice him and offer him as a burnt offering. And if I was in Abraham's situation, I would fully expect that that's what God asked me to do. Because what did he say in the previous chapter? He said, drive off your firstborn son. He's not the one whom I'm going to bless. He blesses him eventually. So he makes him a nation. But the promise comes through Isaac. And so Abraham's standing there going, what am I supposed to do? This doesn't make any sense at all. But here's what I know about anything from the life of Abraham, that if you're experiencing a moment or a season of suffering or intense pain, that this is the big point from the life of Abraham. If you don't remember anything else, write this down and take this away, is that you have to focus on his promise and not your expectation.
Come on.
You have to focus on his promise and not your expectation. What is suffering if not life just not going like I planned? Right? This didn't happen, or that didn't happen, or I lost out on this, or I missed that. Nobody plans to lose a child, a parent, a brother, or a sister. None of us plan on suddenly being fired from our job or losing our homes. People in Texas and Oklahoma don't plan on a tornado coming through their town and destroying everything that they've built their life upon. See, here's the problem with expectations. When we narrow our horizon to just our expectations, we miss everything else around us. When we focus in on only what we expect life to look like, we narrow everything and we miss the bigger picture. But more importantly, when we're only focused on the things that we expect to happen, or if I do this, then this is going to happen, and 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 then I'm going to be 95, and I'm going to have $1 million in the bank, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to live with my family. That's exactly how life's going to go for me. If that's your only focus, not only miss the bigger picture, here's the most important part. You miss the person who can see the biggest picture. And if you're so focused on what's right in front of you, you miss seeing God move in those moments. I was talking about this the other night. I said, I remember it was last night. We were talking about prayers and unanswered prayers. And do you realize that God is answering prayers for you right now that you don't even know you need to pray yet?
Yeah.
That's the God that we serve. 10 years from now, something is going to happen in your life, and you're going to cry out to God, and He's already preparing the person that's going to bless you in that moment of tragedy today to be ready. You may be going through a personal moment of tragedy right now where you're like, God, I have no idea what you're doing. And the whole reason you're in this moment is that 10 years from today, you're going to be able to speak truth and blessing into the life of somebody that's going through what you're going through right now. But when we focus only on our expectations, we miss all of that. It's like pain. You know that your body doesn't remember pain? You're all, the women are looking at me like, you're crazy. We have an idea of pain, but we don't remember pain. So, if you don't believe me, go. Actually, there's teenage boys in here, so I can tell you to go home and do this. But like, if you're working in your yard today and you hit your thumb with a hammer, it is the most painful thing that has ever happened to you in the history of the world. Our body doesn't remember pain. You could smash your thumb and break it into 10 different places and it would hurt. And then you could be running into your house and trip over a big boulder and stub and break your toe, and that pain will override the pain in your thumb. The latest thing that happened is the most painful thing that's ever happened to you in your life. Sure, we remember pain, we understand pain, but we have a tendency as humans to let pain override everything else. We have a tendency as humans for our world to become nothing but the pain that we're experiencing. And I'm not talking about just physical pain, I'm talking about emotional, spiritual, gut-wrench, deep in the bottom of your soul pain at 2 o'clock in the morning. When you're lying in bed awake for the 10th night in a row and you can't figure out what God is doing in your life. We can be overcome by that pain, or we, like Abraham, can find a way to fight through a season of suffering. In church, believe me, listen, if you're sitting here today, you can fight through it. I know too many people who have overcome seasons of suffering and pain and sorrow. You do not have to give up. This does not define your world. It does not and will not define your future. So continue to read with me in chapter 22 of Genesis. It says this in verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut wood for the burnt offering and arose and began to travel to the place which God had told him about. And on the 3rd day, Adam lifted up his eyes and saw the place. Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. 3-day journey. Isaac, let's load up. Let's get some young guys to help us on the journey. Each night setting up camp and each morning taking it down and saddling everything up and loading it up and walking to the mountain. And Abraham, knowing with each step brings him closer to the loss of his son. In verse 5, and Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship. And we'll come and get to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. Does that sound like anything else that happens later in the Bible? The sacrifice carrying the wood. Jesus carrying his cross. Even here, God is pointing to the solution to the problem of sin. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and both of them went together. And listen, if this is your first day with us, this will be new to you. If you've been with us the last 2 weeks, you are going to get tired of me saying this. But the first of 3 lessons that we learned from Abraham's suffering is this, that you have to obey. I told you, I've said it every week. You have to obey. Obedience is a key component to the Christian life. Without obedience, you can't experience joy and peace and hope. They come hand in hand. We don't obey out of a grudging duty. We obey out of a sense of gratitude for the one who saved us really from ourselves. Obedience is a key aspect to our faith. We're saved by faith. It's not of works, lest any man boast. But when we obey, it is an evidence of our faith. They go hand in hand. Faith builds our obedience, and obedience builds our faith. When God says, step out and go, and we obey and step out and go, and He meets us and blesses us in that moment, it increases our faith. So the next time He says go, it's easier to step out and go. If you want to find a way through suffering, if you want to find a path, if you want to find a stream in the desert of your suffering, the first step is obedience. We continue reading in verse 7, and Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And then Abraham said, "Here I am, my son." And Isaac said, "Behold, we have the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide for Himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." And so both of them went together. And the second thing that I see from the life of Abraham that you have to apply to yourself is that you have to depend upon His provision. You can't depend upon your own provision. You have to depend upon His provision. Can you imagine again what is going on what's going through the mind of Abraham and now Isaac? Like Isaac he's got to be picking up on it, right? Like, I'm the worst gift giver in the history of the world. Like, I so want the person to get the gift because I just want to see the joy on their face. I love giving gifts. It's just who I am. And so I'll go Christmas shopping like a month before Christmas. And 2 weeks before Christmas, my wife has everything because I can't keep it from her. And then I got to go out and buy more gifts to surprise her. That's when I get in trouble, right? I'm the worst. How in the world for 3 days is Abraham, the two servants and his son, walking to the mountain? Abraham fully expecting to sacrifice Isaac. Dude, he's got to be morose, but he's got to be crying and tearing up, doesn't he? He's human. Wouldn't you be? And the closer they get, and he's like, "Hey, you guys stay back here, and we're not going to go worship, and then we're going to come back to you." And we see in those words hope, don't we? He obeyed, and he says to them, I'm going to back up in verse 5. And Abraham said to the young man, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." He's walking up the mountain fully expecting to sacrifice Isaac. But he's fully expecting, and he doesn't know how, but to come back down the mountain with his son. And then Isaac begins to question, go, "God, Abraham, where's the sacrifice?" And Abraham says, "God Himself will provide a lamb for the burnt offering. We just have to depend upon His provision." And so they begin to walk up the mountain together. Verse 9. Trekking up the mountain, they come to the place in which God had told them, and Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid it on the altar on top of the wood. Now, I literally believe every word the Bible writes. I believe that this happened. I gotta go, did Isaac fight it? Was he like, "What are you doing, Dad?" The intimate moment between father and son is not totally recorded here. It says that he tied his son and put him on the wood. But in a happy moment, laying over the altar, where Abraham puts his hand on Isaac's head and says, "Son, you have to trust me. More importantly, you have to trust God." As he begins to pull his hand back, he takes the knife to slaughter his own son in verse 11. But the angel of the Lord called out from him from heaven and said, "Abraham." And he said, "Here am I." He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And then the third thing that I learned from the life of Abraham in this moment of suffering is this, that you have to trust God with the outcome. Isaac laying on an altar, on top of the wood, bound. Abraham reaches back for a knife, trusting God for the outcome. I don't know how you're going to do it, God, but you told me to do it, so I'm going to take this knife in my hand. God, I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know how he and I are going to walk down this mountain together, God, but I trust you. I'm going to lift my hand to this knife. God, I don't know how you're going to do it. I trust that he and I are going to walk down this mountain. And God steps in perfect timing, in a perfect way, and says, don't do it, stay your hand. Because he obeyed, he depended upon God, and he trusted his outcome. Let's see how it finishes out here as we bring it home for the day. In verse 12, he said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of the son. And so Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. I want to keep coming down. I want to keep reading here. I know I'm almost done, I promise. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven. In verse 16, if you're following along, and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars in the heaven, and as the sand on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gates of his enemy. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. You don't know what your obedience will lead to. Abraham's obedience led the person of Jesus Christ, coming, living, dying, and rising again, and all the nations of the earth being blessed. And so Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived there. Listen, I'm going to double down on something that I say a lot as we close today. You can't do anything that we've talked about in this series by yourself in isolation. You may get a little bit down the pathway by yourself, but you will never experience the freedom that comes when you practice these things in your life unless you're doing it in community with other people. Yeah. Because when you're by yourself, all you have speaking to you is your emotions. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, your emotions lie to you. They tell you you're not good enough. They tell you if you just work a little bit harder or a little bit longer, then everything would be perfect. They'll tell you that you're not smart enough, or that you're not funny enough, or that people don't like you. They tell you that it's not worth trying, that the effort moving forward isn't worth it. Your emotions lie to you. Doing this in community is the only way. And here's why. It's because when your emotions begin to lie to you, and you begin to feel like the promises of God aren't true in your life, we get to rally around you as believers, and we get to tell you, no, it is true. Even though you don't feel like it's true, it is true. And our faith gets to help carry your faith along. And you get to a place where you can say, God, I trust you with the outcome. Yeah. I trust you, I trust you, I trust you. And so if you find yourself in a place today where you're like, and Pastor Dave said, I need that community that you're talking about. I don't know what it is, but I need that community in my life. I'm going to be up here kind of for a couple of minutes after the beginning of the service, at the end of the service. Come talk to me. We will get you connected and we will get you plugged in, okay? Don't wait. You don't have to go through this yourself, by yourself. You have people that want to surround you, and you, more importantly, have the God of the universe that wants to walk with you. And so, Father, as we close today, God, in humble adoration, we stand before you thankful for who you are and what you've done. God, we are so blessed to be a part of what you're doing in the city of Middleton through Grace Bible Church. And God, we want to be faithful to what you're calling us to do. But God, recognizing that there may be some people that are hurting today, that are in seasons of suffering, that need brothers and sisters in Christ to rally around them and to hold them up and to carry them along. So God, we want to apply the things that we learned from the life of Abraham individually, but as a church, God, we want to obey. God, when you tell us to go, and God, we want to depend upon your provision, and God, we're going to trust you with the outcome. So Jesus, we are grateful for you. We are thankful for today. In your precious and holy name, amen. As you guys leave, don't forget this Tuesday from 6 to 8 at our house, Apollo's barbecue, their invitation factor of the next steps. Go in his grace and peace. Have a wonderful day.